Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and specifically, this is my meta review of the Dungeons & Dragons versus Rick and Morty box set. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, so what is a meta review? So a meta review is reviewing everything about a product except the content, right? So let's do the who, what, when, why, and where, okay? So the when, this product comes out on November 19th, which is in the future, right? That's like almost 3 weeks away, right? And so it's not, this product is not out yet, but we know it's coming, and we know a lot about it, right? Because that's the way our society works now, is we know tons about the stuff before it's released, right? Which is kind of cool. I love that part, right? And so basically this comes out on November 19th, 2019, and this is like 20 days before its release, right? So it's a pretty big change there. Okay. So who is fascinating on this? Oh, you know what? Let's talk about the what, okay? So this is the Dungeons & Dragons versus Rick and Morty box set. So this is a box set. It's going to be exactly like the Essentials kit, right? In that it'll have a rule book and it'll have an adventure. It's probably going to have some dice in there, and maybe it'll have a little bit of ephemera beyond that, right? And it'll all be in a cool box, right? And we already know what it looks like, right? Rick and Morty are right on the cover, and they're in a dungeon having a D&D style adventure, right? So box sets are its own thing. They have a really storied history within Dungeons & Dragons. You'll find right here on this channel, you'll find the box, my coverage of pretty much every single box set that's ever been made, basic box set that's ever made for every edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Right, and so this is an extension. So it being a box set, there's a history for box sets, and this Rick and Morty box set really is a new direction in the history of box sets for Dungeons and Dragons, right? So just to be aware, so you're aware, the rule book is a basic, dry, standard, boiled down of a 64-page rule set, right? Maybe, or like, actually, you can get the Dungeons & Dragons rules all the way down to a 32-page rule set. We saw that in the Stranger Things rules, right? So, and basically, this is Rick Sanchez coming in and marking up, doing the Rick Sanchez character from Rick and Morty, doing a markup on the Dungeons & Dragons rules, which is really quite fascinating, right? And so that's really, really interesting. And then the adventure is actually very, very meta. It actually comes from his perspective of Rick Sanchez replacing to actually buying Wizards of the Coast, buying Dungeons & Dragons instead of Wizards of the Coast buying Dungeons & Dragons, and then him actually like interacting with the history of the game itself. This is going to be an incredibly strange product. This is, I thought that the Stranger Things product was weird. This is even weirder than that, right? This is by far the strangest Dungeons & Dragons product that has ever existed, bar none, right? So that's the what of it, okay? So we've done the when and the what. Who's involved in this? Well, there's a comic book creator by the name of Jim Zub. Jim Zub he's a really fantastic, he wrote Wayward, and he's done a lot of work for Marvel. He wrote Pathfinder comic books. He's a really smart guy, and he's done a lot to create some really cool comic books. So he's a traditional comic book writer. He's done a lot of work for Wizards of the Coast. He's done work for Paizo. He's done work for Marvel, right? He's really a very talented comic book writer, but he did the writing on this. Adam Lee is in the mix. He is a newer Dungeons & Dragons guy. I actually think he came over from the Magic the Gathering side. Excuse me. Adam Lee is in the mix on the writing on this as well. And then the Wizards of the Coast team. Also, let's talk about who else is involved in this. Patrick Rothfuss. So Patrick Rothfuss' name is not on the Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set. But Patrick Rothfuss did do writing on the Rick and Morty versus Dungeons & Dragons versus Rick and Morty graphic novel, right? Now, Patrick Rothfuss is a really fascinating guy, right? Patrick Rothfuss is the poor man's George R.R. Martin. There is a new class of emerging authors, right? I call them AAA offs. AAA offs. It's not a good title. It is abandoned audience authors, right? George R. R. Martin is the most famous of these. He abandoned his audience and decided, I would rather go to conventions and talk to HBO producers than write the end of my series. And that's what he does. That's his life now. Anybody who thinks that he's writing on those books, you're a fool, right? Like, he's not writing anything on the books. He's not working to finish Game of Thrones, right? Like, that's, like, at this point, that's a laughable joke, right? We can all agree that, you know, George R. R. Martin is not working on the finish to Game of Thrones. He's doing everything but, right? Patrick Rothfuss is the same thing. He has a series, right? It's called The King Killer Chronicles. He wrote 2 books in this series, and for like 5 years now, he's done nothing on the 3rd book, right? Now, if you ask him, he'll probably tell you he's scrawled down some notes or whatever, but like, it's clear, right? He's written video games, he's written comic books, he's gone to tons of conventions. He is not working on that 3rd book, right? So Patrick Rothfuss, everybody loves Patrick Rothfuss. Everybody at the Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons office loves Patrick Rothfuss, right? Now, I have a different take on him. I consider him an abandoned audience author, a AAA author, right? And so, like, they're interesting. I don't know. Like, maybe the government should get involved and make them finish their products. I don't know. Like, just an idea, right? Like, and if that sounds crazy to you, just be aware, like, the government's involved in all kinds of different commercial ventures in America. They, like, if a raisin company makes too many raisins, they make them bury tons of them in the ground, right? So, you know, like, a government official showing up at Patrick Rothfuss's, door and saying, hey, maybe you should, serve the audience that you promised to serve when you started this series, right? Like, it's not that crazy, right? Right. So we'll keep moving here. All right. So Patrick Rothfuss is dotted line connected to the Dungeons and Dragons versus Rick and Morty box set. Okay. So we've talked about the who, what, and when, where. One thing that's very interesting about the where. So this will be available on Amazon. You can do your pre-orders right there, right now. Also, it will be available in FLGSs. One thing I think is interesting is the Essentials kit was actually the Stranger Things box set had a special release period where it was available first at Target, right? That is not the case with this product. It does not appear to have a special release window where it is available at a specific store. Excuse me. So that is not occurring. Now, that is not an accident. I think that very well may be connected to the strangeness of the Rick and Morty product, right? Of the Dungeons and Dragons versus Rick and Morty box set. So Rick and Morty is a really, really fascinating product, right? So one of the themes of Rick and Morty is nihilism, right? Who on earth wants to connect their product to nihilism? It seems really odd. It is odd. Rick and Morty is odd. It is a very unusual show. Also, the Szechuan sauce incident, right? There are you can go on the internet right now and see that McDonald's, when they tried to interact with the Rick and Morty fandom, it turned incredibly bad, incredibly fast, right? So, and the other thing is Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon is the creator for, there's somebody else who's in there too, but Dan Harmon's like the famous guy, and oh, by the way, Dan Harmon is also connected in that Dan Harmon actually had a show called Harmon Quest, where he was playing Dungeons & Dragons or a Dungeons & Dragons-like game, right? Or it reflected Dungeons & Dragons, right? So Dan Harmon is a mix. But also, Dan Harmon, right, he has talked very publicly where he is suffering from, he has some personal issues that he's walking through as he's creating Rick and Morty, right? Like, and where, like, you would be like, oh, somebody who has that problem, maybe they should be in recovery rather than actively working on the product, and this is an open question because he's talked about these problems very, very publicly, right? And so it's really fascinating. Like, when you're attaching Rick and Morty to Dungeons and Dragons, it's not just, a cartoon show. It's a very unusual cartoon show, right? So this box is really, really strange. And I think one of the strange parts of it is it's not going to have one of these comfortable release windows where, Target's like, oh, we're happy to get that, right? Like, Target's like, oh, I don't know, that's a little strange, right? And I get that, right? Even though I do know Rick and Morty products are sold at Target. The other thing is, it could be that Wizards of the Coast is just walking away from that, of having these like strange release window opportunities where they've paired with a specific store that will have it first, right? They might just be walking away from that, just from a complexity issue, right? So we've talked about when, what, where, who, why. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? It's a really good question, right? It's a really valid question, right? So there's some really interesting answers. Let's get into it, right? So first and foremost, I can absolutely tell you one of the reasons why this is happening. So one, Dan Harmon's interest in Dungeons & Dragons made Rick and Morty closer to the Dungeons & Dragons property. I think the people at Wizards of the Coast are genuine Rick and Morty fans, right? Jim Zub has worked with Dungeons & Dragons previously on other products, right? So people who were connected to Rick and Morty were connected to Dungeons & Dragons, and so there was a natural connection there, okay? That's one reason. There is another reason, okay? I don't know if you noticed this, but Hasbro Gaming is starting to put their names directly on these products, right? And I actually think the days when Wizards of the Coast name will be on Dungeons & Dragons are numbered. I actually do think at this point Wizards of the Coast is completely superfluous. Wizards of the Coast was a company that briefly owned Dungeons & Dragons between 1997 and 1999, right? But Hasbro brought it in 1999, and the real driver, right, the real owner of Dungeons & Dragons has been Hasbro since 1999. Now, Hasbro's design hand is being very clearly seen, all right? Now, if you think that's not correct, listen up, right? So basically, the Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty design, the Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set is a skin on a D&D box set. It is a theme. It's a theme, okay? So it is a themed Dungeons & Dragons box set. Well, guess what? Hasbro has massive experience with themed product, right? They also know how to make themed product incredibly profitable, right? Now, where do they have that experience? Monopoly, right? Yeah, I'm almost positive now, right? Is it Milton Bradley? I don't even know if Milton Bradley's still around. To my knowledge, Monopoly is owned by Hasbro, right? And Monopoly is themed 6 ways to Sundays. You can buy a Warhammer 40K themed Monopoly. Now, if I'm wrong and Hasbro doesn't own Monopoly, then Hasbro is simply copying their model. But I think they do own it, right? I think Hasbro owns Monopoly, right? So, but Monopoly has a long history of this, right? You can buy the Socialist Monopoly. You can buy Monopoly for millennials. You can buy Millennial Monopoly. You can buy, and these aren't jokes, these are real products. You can buy Warhammer 40K Monopoly. You can buy, there's literally 100 themed Monopolies, right? And I just named some of the strangest ones for you, right? And it's themed in, there's a Star Wars Monopoly. There's multiple Star Wars Monopolies, right? There's all kinds of themed Monopolies, right? And so basically, this is a new approach to products that's incredibly profitable, right? For these companies. And it's a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's like, here's the chocolate, here's the peanut butter, together they're better, right? And that's what this Rick and Morty product is. If you listen to Kate Welch talk about this product, she's like, this product barely functioned. Like, she said the adventure in here is playable. She said it's absolute trash, right? And the reason why, it's not exaggeration, that's literally what she said, right? The reason why is the adventure in this book is not really meant to serve as an adventure. It's meant to serve as a D&D adventure that was written by Rick Sanchez, right? Which means it doesn't even need to be functional. If it's kind of broken and not fully functional, that, Rick Sanchez is a drunk. Like, he in the show, he struggles with alcoholism, right? So if this wasn't even playable, it would just be a joke that Rick Sanchez wrote it and it wasn't playable, right? And this gets into some really incredibly strange territory with Dungeons & Dragons. Like, we are entering a space where these products, these box sets, right, will function less as a Dungeons & Dragons product, right, and more as an ambassador for the Dungeons & Dragons brand, right? And I will say, I think this could be incredible. I'm actually not opposed to this in any way, right? I do have a couple of issues with overall with the Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set. I think there's some problems with it, but I love that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are taking chances with the brand, right? Like, you don't achieve great things without risk, and there's some risk here, right? And this is a risky product, and I think some incredible things are going to come out of this. One of the things that's going to come out of this is this truly, like, this is really wild. Like, this is really incredible what's happening with this product. So one of the things is the box sets can start to serve as ambassadors to specific communities, right? So Rick and Morty fans who have never played Dungeons & Dragons may jump on board with Dungeons & Dragons here. And the box sets are a great place to come in, right? And they don't really need to see a perfect rendition of Dungeons & Dragons in the box set in their first outing with Dungeons & Dragons. What they really need to do is they need to build up some goodwill for Dungeons & Dragons, right? And that may draw them to the Essentials kit, or that may draw them to the 3 core rule books, right? And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. The other thing is, I love this idea that you could, like, and boy, I'll tell you, if we're doing a Dungeons & Dragons versus Rick and Morty box set, there's clearly no products that couldn't exist, right? We can have a Barbie Dungeons & Dragons now. We can have a Star Wars Dungeons & Dragons box set, right? We can have, there's nothing more ridiculous than a Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set. Those two products have nothing to do with each other, right? They're literally, it's just a peanut butter and chocolate situation. Two things that you wouldn't think would go together. They happen to go together well. And here's the product, right? So one of the things is there's I think the Dungeons & Dragons versus Rick and Morty box set really kind of ushers in a new day of the box sets serving as ambassadors to small communities, serving as talismans, containing much of the good things but not all of the good things of the game, serving as collectibles, serving as as promotion, right? This is going to get covered, but this has already been covered by dozens and dozens of news sources, and by the time it's done, probably 100, maybe even 1,000 different news sources will cover this. So these mixed box sets, right? We've already had the Stranger Things Dungeons & Dragons box set. Now we're going to have the Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set. There's no limit to this. You can mix it. You can mix D&D with anything now. Like, that's clear, right? And that's exciting. That is truly exciting. And all of this is good, too, because Dungeons & Dragons is going to start to make more money, right? And this is important because I will tell you right now, pay attention, the tabletop role-playing game business model is absolutely atrocious. It is atrocious, right? Here, I'm going to sell you these 3 books for $50 a piece. You now have everything you need to buy nothing from us for 10 years. That is a terrible business model. Think about how much money they make on Magic the Gathering, right? They have built-in inherent mechanisms to make you buy new product every 3 months, right? There's nothing like that in Dungeons & Dragons, right? Nobody needs the adventures that they're making. The game literally should be equipping you to never need their adventures, right? So it's really, really fascinating, right? So this is an incredibly strange product. And last is how. How was this made, right? So this was that is another one too, is all of this is good except one thing, right? It is taking bandwidth, right? So what do I mean by it's taking bandwidth? Well, what I mean by specifically by it's taking bandwidth is we don't have a 5e Planescape. We don't have a 5e Dark Sun, right? And one of the reasons why is this product, right? This took bandwidth from the teams that could have been used to create some of the products that many, many, many fans have been genuinely asking for. And I'll tell you right now, nobody asked for this. Nobody asked for this. Nobody was like, I really want a Dungeons & Dragons Rick and Morty box set. Like, people didn't even have an idea in their brain that this existed, right? Like, it's just like, truly, right? So basically, it is really, really fascinating that that this product exists, right? There are problems with them. I didn't really have the time to get into all the problems that exist with this product. That's okay. That's okay. My overall opinion is that this is a good thing, and that for the hobby, it is a good thing that this will exist. We we are going to be better off because Hasbro can attach more money to Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm positive that some of that money is going to go to making the lives of the existing design team better or expanding that design team. So I'm very excited about this. I think this is all good. It's good. It's not all good. There's a couple sharp edges on this, but overall I'm super excited about this, and I'm happy that it's happening. It's really, really fascinating, and it's quite surprising. And I like to be surprised by Dungeons & Dragons. I think we all do. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion on this product. Please let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.